Hit record. Uh, so again, thank you so much for joining us today. I am joined by my colleagues Rachel, Liz, and Taylor from UConn School of Social Work. We have the opportunity to support Pyramid Model in the state in partnership with the Office of Early Childhood. This is one of our series offerings of lunch and learn content to give piecemeal information about the pyramid model, hopefully while you are able to enjoy some lunch given the time frame. Our topic today is the case for Tier 1 universal strategies, and we'll launch right into it. As I shared in our opening, all of this work is done in partnership with our colleagues at the Office of Early Childhood to support their vision for pyramid model for all throughout the state of Connecticut, and they support us in funding this work entirely. Our goal for the next little bit of time, for the next hour, is to accomplish the following three things: to give you a brief introduction to the model. We know some of you may have been able to join previous webinars or previous iterations of pyramid model offerings in your region or throughout the state, but wanting to acknowledge that we're inviting people to join these as they learn about them. So starting us off with a grounding of what we mean by the model, and then launch into how the framework of nurturing responsive relationships is really the place to start. That when people think about pyramid model, they think about challenging behavior, and we're going to focus first on relationships in the environment to ground that work. And we'll hopefully all leave with an understanding of why that's worth it at the end of this hour. And then we'll go into some practical strategies and routines and examples of how things like schedules and routines, as well as offering some primers around behavior expectations, matter for this work. So within the next 60 minutes, or now just a bit shy of that, we hope that you'll walk away with a buy-in around this paradigm shift of focusing first on the environment and relationships, and how the calories burned there will pay dividends in the end, even though it seems a bit far afoot from the incidents that may have gotten you to look up something like pyramid model or look for resources around behavior that feels far more challenging than those moments. We hope to provide some concrete examples of how to meet that goal. And then there's an exhaustive list throughout the internet at a number of different websites specifically related to pyramid model. So Liz and our team has pulled together some additional resources that you'll get links to, a Google Drive folder with additional resources. So today, we're not going to have the time to go over every strategy, but really just go over the approach and then give you the direct link to some additional supports. So we'd love to invite you to sign in via the chat. Let us know your name, the age of children that you teach or support, or whatever role that you have, whether it's coach or consultant or other. And then how do you keep yourself calm when children's behavior challenges you? So we know from the pyramid model that this work is done through intention, but that intention, the application of that intention is only accomplished when adults themselves are calm and able to focus on the consistency in the environment and the interactions and routines. So would love to invite you all to join in the chat and let us know your strategies for staying calm. And as I move on, just in the slides, I invite Liz and Rachel to share anything insightful shared in the chat. Give you a minute or two to start populating that. For those of you that haven't met us already, we are the team supporting pyramid model within our OEC partnership. We are the Parent Infant Early Childhood team, our PEAK team, and you'll hear from a couple of us today. Okay, so starting with the grounding of what is pyramid model, it is the long title is the pyramid model for promoting social and emotional competence in infants and young children. And there's a reason why people just say pyramid or pyramid model for short, because that is it's a tongue twister. But essentially, it is a public health approach to supporting social and emotional development and skills of infants, toddlers, and young children within their natural settings. So it has strategies for classrooms, for other sort of learning environments, for family home childcare, and for children's home environments and community settings. Really anchoring first in an effective workforce for any of these things to be applied. And it really offers intentionally a paradigm shift of not thinking first about the few kids that exhibit the most challenging behaviors in a given classroom or group setting. But how do we think about the way that adults are organizing the environment, supporting those relationships, scaffolding skills around friendship and problem solving and self-regulation to reduce those incidences that we think of at the top as challenging behavior. And I'll pause there. It looks like we have a couple of things in the chat. I don't know if Rachel or Liz want to call out any.
Sure. I'm going backwards now, but one that Sarah mentioned that I think some folks are also sort of connecting with is remembering to breathe, positive mantras. Favorite in classrooms right now is "This is not an emergency," and I think that that's something that can be really helpful. Sometimes it's like our brain really gets ahead of what's actually happening, and it can really sort of feel like it's an actual emergency. And so reminding ourselves that it's in fact not an emergency is just fine. Um, I also see Chelsea mentioned take a deep breath and try to remember that it's my job to teach my kiddo the coping skills and they're still learning. Yeah, I think that piece, they're still learning, is so helpful. Sometimes it can, I think it's easy to have the tendency to feel like they should already know the skill if we've taught it a time or two, and really appreciate that reminder. And then Jaya, when working with children, I just try to remind myself that their behavior is a form of communication. And as the adult in the situation, it's my job to sort of help them figure things out and work through. Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge piece of the frame of pyramid model is behaviors communication. So how can we not take it personally and not sort of have our buttons pushed, but really sort of try to understand then what is the child trying to communicate and how can we support them?
Thank you so much, Rachel. And those are brilliant tips. And I think highlight the two takeaways of sort of pyramid and tier one so succinctly, in that one, it's like embodying that pyramid, that paradigm shift and the mantra of behavior, even though it might feel personal in the moment, it's not intentional, it's communicating a need. So that sort of framework, coupled with the idea that adults need the same thing that kids do around regulation. So all of the strategies around taking a deep breath, perspective taking, all of the things that you elicited from the chat. We know to teach kids, and we don't always know to reinforce it in adults or in ourselves. And so the pyramid model, and again, this idea of tier one, really helps us be intentional about that. So thanks. And it looks like even a couple other folks are chiming in too. So again, just grounding us in sort of the model and this approach, the pyramid model rests on a foundation of inclusivity, cultural responsivity, and anti-racist, anti-bias practices. So a lot of this is both perspective taking, it's strategies, but it's also looking within relationships and within classroom program-wide settings, using data and using coaching to really dismantle any approaches that are inequitable in our response to challenging behaviors in children. It looks at social emotional development as foundational for all other developmental domains. And that really is a paradigm shift for many, that we think about, when you're, just supporting a child to move through the first couple of years of life, you're thinking about teaching them to walk and teaching them to talk and expecting them to understand behavior. And this sort of helps us sort of flip that, so that if we teach them emotional regulation and strategies like that, they're going to have the physiological state to engage in their environment and learn those other things naturally as well. That children need to be taught social emotional skills, just like reading and math and motor skills. That the mantra here that Yoa highlighted, behavior is communication, right? If you walk away with anything from today, it's hopefully that. And that pyramid model practices, while the child is often the anchor or the thing that gets us in the door, it really focuses on adult behavior. So when a pyramid model coach is in a classroom or in a program or working one-on-one with an educator, they're focusing on what the adult can do to adjust or change either the environment or the structure of the interaction or the response to support both that adult and the child to be successful in the setting. This is one of those fancy slides that comes in bit by bit. But again, going on our theme of supporting ourselves to do this work and sort of what do we have to do intentionally to do that. We need the workforce. When we think about an effective workforce, it's not just giving them the tools or access to this information, but how do we support the climate and that focuses around staff wellness, around staff support. They can only pour from cups that are filled, right? And I think we know that theoretically, but how can we, when we walk into a pyramid model program or a program that's demonstrating these approaches, it's not just the interactions with kids, but it's how are staff talking with each other, how do they feel about their support as well. So all of that leads us into tier one, right? So creating a caring community is the sort of underlying anchor, and it's going to focus on these what you see here. So relationships with children, meaning the adult relationship with children, with relationships among children. So how are adults sort of fostering and supporting those burgeoning problem solving and friendship skills and sharing tasks that can feel very dramatic at times if you're 3 or 4 or 5. What do relationships with families look like? And this is something that I think our field is still emerging around, and COVID really kind of truncated a lot of efforts there. And I think we're still in many places like onboarding or re-onboarding strategies to really help families feel welcome within settings and help them sort of contribute to what we know about their child and all of those types of things. And then relationships with colleagues. So really thinking it's like a full 360 view of the interactions that contribute to a community. And again, as I said when we first started, even the website for the National Pyramid Model resources is called challengingbehavior.org, right? So it's this acknowledgement that the challenging behavior is the big ticket, right? That's what gets people to come to learn about behavior because, if you just said, I'm going to give a lecture about typical behavior, people would say, well, I know that, right? But what people have a hard time with and what we know is impacting programs and workforces and all of that, staff sustainability, et cetera, is this idea of how do I respond in the moment? And pyramid model sort of supports that by starting away from it, right? So because what we know is if a child is having a hard time in the moment, there's not a lot that you can do other than help them re-regulate to, help them teach skills to avoid that interaction later, right? They're not going to be at a headspace to be able to incorporate that. What we need to do instead is scaffold what we can within the environment, within the task, within their sort of skill building with respect to regulation and sort of strategies around calming myself when I'm getting upset, so that we can avoid that moment of challenging behavior and then problem solve after, right? But so a lot of the approaches around starting at the bottom are what we know with respect to how dependent very young kids are on relationships and predictability and routines for safety and security, and how important that is in the early years within their learning settings. For any of us that have been impacted today or yesterday or this season by snow delays and things like that, we know that adults get sort of offset when things feel less predictable as well. And so it just is dialed way up for very young kids when everything feels unpredictable for them. So the more that we can focus on routines and relationships and predictability, the calmer that everyone will be, the more regulated everyone will be, which will contribute to a more socially, emotionally anchored environment, and less of those outbursts. And so all of that is done by relationships. We know that babies from moment one of their life really learn from, are totally dependent on relationships. And the math varies based on drop off and pickup times. But when we think about early relationships, those caregivers that are, or educators that are with very young kids throughout the day, it's a lot of time, and the consistency and the dynamic of those relationships are as important as their family relationships within those early years. And so this idea of responsivity and predictability and serve and return interactions within educators and caregivers, family home providers, and very young kids in their care contributes to brain development just as much as those initial interactions with family does. That young children not only learn responsivity and sort of the pattern of interactions and dynamics between themselves and people, they also learn, how to deal with different emotions, right? What are acceptable or unacceptable responses to feeling frustrated or sad or bored, right? And how supported are they to try new skills, to sort of explore their environment, to bring new ideas, right? How available is this person to me when I'm excited about something, or when I'm needing help problem solving, those types of things. And this is a brief video that talks about the concept of serve and return, which intentionally borrows that language from tennis, right? This idea that it's a dynamic back and forth. And there's such a huge alignment when you walk into a classroom or a program or a home that has been implementing pyramid. The dynamic of communication that's not always task focused, but is sort of more relationally anchored, you can feel, you can see it dial up. So just have that in mind as you watch this video. Okay, I'm gonna pivot because the embedded videos never work seamlessly. I'm going to pull this up online. Give me 1 second, I apologize. Okay. Thank you for the grace with technology. Hopefully you're seeing the video there. Yes. Okay. And Rachel, if you would just let me know if sound works, that would be awesome too.
The key to forming strong brain architecture is what's known as serve and return interaction with adults. In this developmental game, new neural connections form in the brain as young children instinctively serve through babbling, facial expressions, and gestures. And adults return the serve, responding in a very directed, meaningful way. It starts very early in life, when a baby coos and the adult interacts and directs the baby's attention to a face or hand. This interaction forms the foundation of brain architecture upon which all future development will be built. It helps create neural connections between all the different areas of the brain, building the emotional and cognitive skills children need in life. For example, here's how it works for literacy and language skills. When the baby sees an object, the adult says its name. This makes connections in the baby's brain between particular sounds and their corresponding objects. Later, adults show young children that those objects and sounds can also be represented by marks on a page. With continued support from adults, children then learn how to decipher writing and eventually to write themselves. Each stage builds on what came before. Ensuring that children have adult caregivers who consistently engage in serve and return interaction, beginning in infancy, builds a foundation in the brain for all the learning, behavior, and health that follow.
For those of us in the infant mental health field, we're grateful to all of the brain science that has emerged in the last several years, or more than several years. I'm aging myself because it's helped to really legitimize the work that folks have known for a very long time. Okay, just resharing the slides. Hopefully you're seeing now, yes? Yes. So within that sort of consideration, we know that social emotional skills are modeled and taught in context, so that, you know, kids pick up not only, you know, the old adage of do as I say, not as I do doesn't work. Kids are learning sort of through, again, like all of those layers of adult interaction, you know, the interaction between the person that my grandmother or mom is handing me off to, and my mom or grandmother, like they're reading those cues, like and giving them information about how they should feel about that dynamic. So they're sponges, as we say, around learning from social interactions. And so thinking about some of the strategies, again, we'll at the end of this give you a link to a Google Drive that has a bunch of additional resources, because once you sort of have some concrete examples, it's easy to come up with others or sort of fit these into your specific settings. But some examples here of just, you know, how the culture of kindness was supported or sort of created, scaffolded within a given classroom or program. You know, you'll see here a kindness tree. This is a blank one, as you can see, but the idea is that you would have this in a hallway or you know, against a bulletin board, and then kids get rewarded or praised for acts of kindness that go there. So they might be additional branches, or they could be flowers, or, you know, apples or fruit on the tree. And that, you know, that is sort of called out, this idea that often kids get told what not to do and not always reinforced when they're doing something that we would love for them to do. And so this is a way of, again, sort of intention, like it's visual. So we think that's for the kids, but it really helps the adults to remember to do it, and to have that moment where you're really, you know, celebrating, you know, so-and-so helping their friend who, you know, was putting away the books and they all fell down, or whatever it might be. And then, you know, ways to sort of build sense of community and culture within the classroom are endless. But again, this idea of, you know, supporting, you know, moments to sort of celebrate those tasks, really kind of undoing the idea of using the sort of bulletin board or the pins to sort of mark when behavior is bad, and instead, you know, how do we celebrate when we see what we want to see in that interaction, or sort of moments of great sort of kindness between, again, between peers, between other adults, etc. You know, another sort of really important strategy here, and you'll see that this slide is slightly different because it's pulled directly from the pyramid model training content, but promoting positive identities needs to be sort of intentionally thought of within the classroom as well, and it contributes greatly to culture. So play materials that reflect the lives of children and their families, having diversity and in racial identity, abilities, skin tones, and gender in all of the materials offered. So you can see not only in the books, but in the dolls, in the art materials that are offered there. Have visuals that reflect all children in your program or classroom and their families, and invite families to participate in the making of those or the sharing of those. One of the things I love seeing in classrooms whenever I'll go in to do an observation is, when families are invited to make a poster or decorate a page about their family, and you can see so many different representations and photos of things that, just again, contribute greatly to the environment of the setting. And again, it can seem like having a range of books is different than the challenging moment and how do I de-escalate that. But the more that children feel reinforced and seen and supported in an environment, the less sort of explosive they're going to be, that they're going to sort of feel more regulated and supported in an environment that reflects them. And this is just a chart, again, like trying to sort of, think about not only how am I teaching kids to interact with each other in sort of a supportive way, but how are we thinking about this, across the narrative of, my dynamic with children, the dynamic among and between children, my dynamic with families, and then my dynamic with my other colleagues. And you can see some examples there. And I think now is when I toss the mic over to Rachel, who's going to walk through, now that we've sort of looked at the contributions of relationships, she's going to walk through some strategies specific to supportive environments within Tier 1.
Thanks so much, Kate. Yes, so we're going to move from relationships to talking about this second piece of Tier 1, which is high quality supportive environments. Sometimes I think when we sort of hear environment and think environment, we really think about the physical space, which is important, and we're going to touch on briefly, but it also includes things like schedules, routines to support the activities in the schedule, supporting children through transitions, helping all children find ways to engage in classroom activities, and rules and expectations. And so kind of similar to when Kate was talking about relationships, we're not going to be able to get into all of the things for each of these different pieces, but want to kind of provide the broader structure for all of the things that we sort of consider within that environments section. And then I also just want to highlight, because I think it's really important that we remember that all of our environmental strategies are also, they're situated within the context of relationships. And so what I mean by that is you could have a beautiful visual schedule that you go through every day and do all the things you're supposed to with that, and have great routines to support your schedule, and thought through your transitions carefully, thought about ways to engage children, thought about your rules and expectations. All of that could be really sort of meaningfully thought through. And also, though, all of that happens within the relationships in the classroom. And so there have to be good relationships between the adults and the children, among the children, between the caregivers in the classroom. I think something that we don't always think about or remember is that the adults, whether they want to or not, are always modeling. And so if you have two adults or more in the classroom and there's, tension in the relationship between the adults who are supposed to be running the show, kids pick up on that. They're not always able to necessarily name it, but they feel that. So I say all of that to say, all of these things are important, and all of these things also sort of rely on the quality of the relationships to support their efficacy as well. So we're going to first watch a short video from the Wisconsin Mental Health Alliance for Infant Mental Health. I couldn't get the acronym correct. Just sort of talking briefly about predictability. So we'll watch that first, and then we'll sort of situate that for children as well.
Adults rely on clocks, phones, smartwatches, and calendars to constantly keep track of where we are, where we need to be, and what we need to do with our day. Schedules are such a familiar part of our adult day-to-day life. It can be easy to forget that children don't have the same access and understanding of these systems we depend on. When our children have a hard time coping with change in their schedule, or when they have big reactions to what we perceive as small changes, we can find ourselves feeling reactive too. The thing is, infants and small children aren't mind readers. They don't have calendars, they just have us. We are their calendars. Our ability to be consistent and predictable as much as possible helps them learn their schedules and routines. It also increases young children's cooperation and tolerance for transitions, which can be hard on them, especially since so much of their life and day is out of their control. While they can't read, we can provide predictability by using visuals and forecasting what is coming with concise language. First this, then that. We can also be sensitive to the fact that when our routines are disrupted, theirs are too. But unlike us, children aren't capable of predicting or preparing for those changes the way adults can. Unpredictability and disruptions that seem small or insignificant to us can be incredibly stressful or even disorienting for young children who rely on the consistency of their routines to feel safe and secure. This can also activate their brain's threat state, sometimes called flight, fight, or freeze. To recover and get back to a calm and learning state, they and their brains rely on us to bring back those feelings of safety and security through our calm and understanding. Being consistent with routines as much as possible, using visual and verbal cues to forecast and remind them about routines, and taking a moment to connect with your child to reassure, empathize, and talk about changes when they're upset can go a long way in helping you both. Learn more at weaim.org.
Thanks, Kate. I think sometimes it's really helpful for us to be able to practice some perspective taking with kids. I think sometimes we just imagine that they're just fine, and just because something changes doesn't mean that's really going to impact them. But it's helpful, I think, for us to remember all of the ways in which, as adults, we have some things that kind of help us navigate those things that children don't really have. So I want you to hold on to that video about schedules and routines. And I also want you to to hold on to this example or this little vignette. I want you to imagine that you're attending a religious or cultural ceremony for a religion or a culture with which you're unfamiliar. And so you're going into this for the first time. I want you to think about what it feels like cognitively and emotionally to walk into an unfamiliar space. I want you to think about how your thoughts or feelings might impact the way that you engage in the ceremony, and to think about what would help you feel more comfortable or more secure attending the ceremony. And I think it's really reasonable to imagine that you might feel kind of stuck in your head or unsure or a little worried about what it is that you are supposed to be doing in this scenario. You might also sort of wonder, like, am I doing this right? And if not, like, what does that mean, or how is that going to look? And that could certainly get in the way of participating. Like, if you don't really feel like you know what you're supposed to be doing, that could get in the way of how you engage with the event or with the ceremony. And it might be really helpful if you maybe either had someone or had a sort of list of operations. If you had someone maybe who told you the things like what you're supposed to wear to this, or here's what the schedule or kind of order of operations is going to be once you get here, and here's how you can engage. It would maybe be even more helpful if that person were like sitting beside you. And as you went through this thing for the first time, maybe said like, okay, and now it's time to stand up. Yep. And now this is the next thing that we're going to do. And this is how you can participate. And this is, yep, this is the end. We're coming to the end. And here's what this means. So I think that, you know, thinking about that, we've all been in those unfamiliar situations and not really known what to do. And it can feel really uncomfortable. As adults, we usually have ways to manage that discomfort. For children who have never been in the classroom before, or who have been in other learning environments that are different than the structure of our classroom, it can feel really overwhelming to not know what they're supposed to be doing. And so I give this example as a way of really talking about both the schedules and routines, right? Making sure that we're really explicit about the routine of the schedule of the day and the routines that support that, but also about talking about behavior expectations. It's so much easier, again, as an adult and a child, if someone says, hey, this is what we're doing and this is how you should engage. This is how you can participate effectively. We tend to do better and meet expectations when people tell us what those expectations are. And again, that's really true for adults, and it's really true for children. I think a lot of times what we see when children are having a hard time in a classroom is they just don't know what they're supposed to be doing, or they don't know how to engage. Okay, so let's hold on to those two things here for a minute as we continue to talk through a couple of these additional examples. I mentioned that, again, we often think about the physical environment. When we sort of hear environment, we think about the physical setup. That is certainly important. And so things like thinking about making sure that there are enough centers to accommodate the number of children who are in the classroom in a way that children can spread out, right? Where there aren't, 6 children needing to be at one tiny center. That the centers have boundaries where you can sort of see like this is the space in which this center exists, that the materials are developmentally appropriate and that there are enough of them and enough variety of materials, that there aren't wide open spaces for kids to run. Children will run. If they have space, they will run. That's just, I don't know, that's just like a law of being a child, I think. And so, really making sure that this space is set up so that there aren't sort of lanes for kids to be, working on their 40-yard dashes. And that the group area is clearly defined, but there's enough space to accommodate all of the children who are in the classroom, so that, carpet area or wherever it is that you might hold class meetings, etc. And again, those are things I think that often really come to mind when people think about the environment, but just want to highlight those here as well. And then the next piece is about schedules. So I've mentioned this a couple of times, and hopefully some of the ways of kind of thinking about this as an adult has helped bring the message home a bit, but really making sure that there's a visual schedule that children can see, that it's talked throughout the day, right? So we've already done this, and so here's the next thing that we're going to do. I think a lot of times we see this early in kind of the year, like August, September, and then sometimes the reviewing of the schedule sort of falls off as the year moves along. But this is something that, daily and multiple times per day, you want to be referring to the schedule. Ensuring that you're using children's home language as in describing the activities or describing the schedule. And ensuring that the schedule is balanced. And so we have a couple of resources here with the schedules and thinking about your schedules, but I do want to sort of point to the piece about developing a balanced daily schedule, where it helps you to consider sort of like independent versus group events, events where or activities where children need to be like a little bit more kind of quiet or in their seat versus being a little bit more active. I think it really helps you to sort of think through your day and ensuring that, for example, you don't have kind of 5 things within your daily schedule in a row where the expectation is that children sit quietly on the carpet. That's really, that's going to set up some challenges for sure. So there's the piece on schedules. And again, we have some resources that we can share with you to support building a schedule. I'm just looking at the time.
Yeah, I agree. I think just we can email this out.
Okay.
Will be shared with the links. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Kate. So here's just you can watch a video of a teacher using the schedule within their classroom. And then your routines support your schedule. And so the routines just sort of help children understand, for each of these pieces within the schedule, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing? And so your routines are really consistent. They allow children to anticipate what's going to happen next. And they really help increase children's independence. And so you'll notice as you continue to teach the routines over a period of time, children really start to learn them and they start to know what they're supposed to be doing. And it's wonderful both as the teacher, because that makes things easier when children know what to do. But it's also, I think, really cool to see the confidence that instills in children, like what feels better than knowing what it is that you're supposed to be doing. That's a wonderful feeling. And seeing that develop as children really learn the routines and learn how to engage in routines is a really cool thing to see. So, as I said, we couldn't talk through all of those things, but hopefully maybe thinking about with the environment, your physical layout, your schedules and the routines to support the schedules, and then kind of remembering that piece about the ceremony and the behavior expectations, and how can you help ensure that children really know what it is that you're wanting them to do when they come in the classroom. Okay, I'm going to pass it to Liz now.
Really quickly, so this QR code will link you to the Google Drive, but I already put the link in the chat as well. It's just a collection of Tier 1 resources that were gathered and an easy way to find them. I'm also going to share a link to our practice guide website in the Tier 1 section of that. It's a little more detailed and organized and has a little bit more background information to go with the resources. So you can also find the resources there. And then our closing prompt is just for everyone to think about. You can put it in the chat if you'd like to share one thing that you heard that changes how you view young children's behavior as it relates to the environment and relationships. And then this is our next upcoming Lunch and Learn topic. We'll be unpacking one of the National Center's new resources, which is Creating Family Belonging Together. And that will be on March 17th from 12 to 1. I can also put in the chat that link that will link you to our playlist of Lunch and Learns that we have already completed. If anyone would like to go back and see what was talked about in previous sessions. And then if you have any questions or need to get in contact with us, we would love to hear from you, and can be reached at peak@uconn.edu. And we appreciate everyone coming and being patient with us in our technology woes. It was great to have you all here, and we hope to see you next month.
Thanks, everyone.